My brother's blood was still warm on my hands when my sire summoned me. I stood before him, tall, resolute. There was no guilt, no hesitation in me, only the hunger. The gnawing, insatiable need that pulsed through my veins, reminding me that I had become something more. My brother had been weak. He had clung to the life I left behind, but I had no such shackles. I was above that now. I expected nothing less from you, my sire said, his voice smooth, dripping with cold amusement. He moved like a shadow, his eyes gleaming in the dim light of the chamber. But one kill, even that of your kin, proves little. I said nothing, waiting. There was no need for empty words. My worth would be proven through action. You will kill again, he continued, stepping closer, his presence like ice against my skin. But this time, it will be a true test. There is a Draugr, an ancient warrior cursed to wander the earth, bound by dark magic. It roams the mountains to the north, killing without discrimination. Mortal or immortal, it does not care. You will hunt it. You will kill it. His crimson eyes locked onto mine, and you will bring me its heart. I met his gaze, unflinching. Where? His lips curved into a smile. The mountains, where the dead roam. I turned on my heel, already moving toward the door. The thought of facing an ancient Draugr didn't shake me. It excited me, a challenge worthy of my strength. Valen, my sire called after me, his voice laced with something that sounded almost like pride. Do not fail. I didn't respond. Failure wasn't an option. The northern winds bit at my skin as I made my way into the mountains. The cold didn't bother me. I welcomed it. The air was sharp, clear, and with each breath, I felt my senses heighten, every sound, every scent sharpening around me. It wasn't long before I found the first body. A human, or what was left of one. Torn apart, limbs scattered, bones shattered. His eyes were still open, wide with the terror that had claimed him in his final moments. I knelt beside him, fingers brushing the blood-stained snow. The flesh had been ripped clean, claw marks running deep into the bone. I grinned. This was the Draugr's work. A mindless predator, driven by hunger and dark magic. It would meet its match soon enough. I rose and continued on my path, the scent of death growing stronger with each step. The Draugr had been busy. More bodies littered the way. Some human, others vampire. It didn't discriminate. A predator, just like me. But unlike me, it had no control, no purpose beyond its hunger. Pathetic. The path grew steeper as I ascended the mountain, the wind howling through the jagged peaks. The air was thick with the stench of rot and decay, the smell of old death clinging to the stones. I quickened my pace, eager to face the beast that awaited me. The sun had long since set by the time I reached the Draugr's hunting grounds. The cold had become sharper, more biting, as though the very air was trying to drive me back. But I pressed on. In my path was another body. This one, a vampire. His throat had been torn open, his chest ripped apart. I knelt beside him, inspecting the wounds. The Draugr's handiwork, no doubt. I grinned again. The Draugr was near. The village was already dead when I arrived. The air was thick with the scent of blood and rot, heavy enough to cling to the back of my throat. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place, as if nature itself recoiled from the carnage that had unfolded here. The path that led into the village was slick with gore. The once frozen ground soaked with the blood of those who had lived here. Men, women, children. It didn't matter. None had been spared. I strode through the village, my boots sinking into the muck with each step. Bodies littered the ground, broken, torn apart, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Some had been cleaved clean in half, their entrails spilled across the snow like some macabre offering to the gods. Others had been mauled beyond recognition, their faces torn off, their chests split open. But the worst of it? They weren't all dead. I paused as I caught sight of one. A woman, or what remained of her, dragging herself through the blood-soaked dirt. Her lower half was missing, her intestines trailing behind her like the roots of a dying tree. Her hands clawed weakly at the ground, leaving streaks of blood in their wake, and her eyes, wide, unblinking, were filled with a terror that hadn't yet faded. She wasn't screaming. She was too far gone for that. I watched her for a moment, curious. The Draugr's curse lingered here, holding these broken souls between life and death, puppets caught in a cruel limbo. The woman's mouth opened and closed, a low, gurgling moan escaping her lips as she tried to speak, but there was no voice left in her, only suffering. I moved past her, stepping over the corpses as I went deeper into the village. The destruction here was total. Some of the houses had been torn apart, their wooden beams splintered, as though something massive had ripped through them. The doors hung from their hinges, swinging slowly in the dead air, and the windows were shattered, their glass stained red with blood. The Draugr had passed through here like a storm, quick, brutal, and unstoppable. It hadn't just killed, it had decimated. Another body stirred to my left, this one a child, his legs missing, his tiny arms dragging his mutilated body through the muck. His head lolled to one side, the skin of his face torn away, leaving only the exposed muscle and bone. His eyes were empty sockets, yet he still crawled, still tried to pull himself towards something. Anything. The hunger in him was a reflection of the curse, a desperate need to keep moving even after death. I kicked his corpse aside as I walked past. The Draugr's power wasn't just in its brute strength, it was in the way it twisted the very nature of death, refusing to let these souls find peace. The village had been a plaything for it, a canvas for its rage. A few yards ahead, I came across a man, his body cleaved clean in half at the waist, his entrails strewn across the ground like ribbons. One of his arms twitched, his fingers curling and uncurling as if they were trying to grasp at something long gone. I crouched beside him, studying his face. His mouth moved, but no words came, only a soft, wet gurgle. "You're already dead," I murmured, watching as his eyes fluttered, the light in them fading. "Stop fighting." But he couldn't hear me. The Draugr's magic had twisted these people beyond recognition, their bodies clinging to life even as their souls had long since departed. This was what the Draugr left behind, shells of what once were men, women and children, cursed to crawl through the blood-soaked earth in an endless loop of agony. The hunger inside me stirred, and I could feel the dark magic that hung over the village, thick and heavy like the stench of decay. It tugged at me, whispered to me, promising power, promising strength. I could almost taste it, the remnants of the Draugr's curse lingering in the blood that had soaked into the ground, in the broken bodies that still moved, still suffered. I stood, my eyes scanning the horizon. The Draugr wasn't here anymore. It had moved on, leaving this wasteland in its wake. But it was close. I could feel it. I would find it. I would kill it. And I would bring my sire its heart. The Draugr had chosen a tomb as its refuge, a place forgotten by time, a relic buried deep within the heart of the mountain. The entrance was hidden by twisted roots and jagged rocks, but the scent of death led me right to it. The stench of rot hung thick in the air, almost suffocating, as if the very earth had been tainted by the creature's presence. I stood before the entrance, my breath steady, my senses alive with the anticipation of the fight to come. I had never faced anything like the Draugr before. My hunger had driven me to kill humans, but this was different. This was not prey. This was a hunter. A beast fueled by dark magic, bound by a curse that had kept it alive for centuries. I was about to face something ancient, something powerful, and I was ready. I stepped into the tomb, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air inside was colder than the mountain itself, thick with decay and the echo of ancient magic. The ground was littered with bones, some human, others I couldn't recognize, twisted, broken things that had long since turned to dust. The walls were etched with runes, glowing faintly in the dark, their light flickering like dying embers. And then I saw it. The Draugr stood at the far end of the chamber, its massive form looming in the shadows. It was clad in ancient rusted armor, its pale, rotting flesh stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, burning with an otherworldly light, and its breath came in slow, ragged gasps, the sound like stones grinding against each other. It turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and unrelenting. The air grew heavier, the pressure of the magic that bound it pressing down on me, tightening around my chest like a vice. But I didn't falter. I met its gaze head on, my lips curling into a snarl. "Let's see if you can bleed," I growled, and then I lunged. I moved faster than the wind, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. My claws slashed through the air, aimed at its chest, but the Draugr was ready. It swung its massive arm, deflecting my blow with the rusted shield it held in its grip. The force of the impact sent me skidding back, the stone beneath my feet cracking under the pressure. I barely had time to regain my footing before the Draugr charged. It moved with a speed that belied its massive size. Its sword, a jagged, ancient thing, whistling through the air as it came down toward me. I threw myself to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade as it slammed into the ground, sending shards of stone flying. I retaliated, my claws raking across its exposed flesh. The Draugr let out a low, guttural growl, its rotting skin tearing beneath my attack, but there was no blood. Only black, tar-like ooze that seeped from the wounds. I recoiled, the stench of it burning my nose. It swung at me again, faster this time, and I felt the blade connect with my side. Pain exploded through me, a deep, searing agony that sent me stumbling back. I gritted my teeth, feeling the blood seep from the wound, warm and wet against my skin. It wasn't deep enough to kill me, but it hurt. I pressed a hand to my side, snarling as the Draugr advanced, its glowing eyes fixed on me. The wound would heal, but not quickly enough. I needed to end this. The Draugr lunged, its sword raised high, and I saw my opening. I ducked beneath its strike, driving my fist into its chest with all the strength I could muster. I felt the bones crack beneath the force, heard the sickening crunch as my hand shattered through its ribcage. But the Draugr didn't stop. It grabbed me by the throat, its grip like iron, and slammed me into the ground. My head hit the stone with a crack, the world spinning for a moment before I regained focus. The Draugr loomed over me, its glowing eyes burning with rage, and I could feel the magic that kept it alive pulsing in the air around me, thick and oppressive. I snarled, wrenching myself free of its grip, and lashed out with my claws, tearing into its arm. The Draugr howled, the sound echoing through the tomb, but it didn't retreat. It swung its sword again, and this time, the blade caught me across the chest, tearing through flesh and bone. Pain flared through me, white-hot and blinding, but I refused to fall. I staggered back, clutching at the wound, feeling my skin knit itself back together, the magic of my vampiric blood fighting to heal the damage. The Draugr watched me, its eyes narrowing, and I knew it could sense my weakness. I needed to finish this. I lunged forward, using the last of my strength to tackle the Draugr to the ground. We hit the stone with a thunderous crash, and I drove my claws into its chest, tearing at the blackened heart that pulsed beneath its rotting flesh. The Draugr howled, thrashing beneath me, but I didn't let go. I ripped the heart free, black ooze spilling from the wound as I held the still-beating organ in my hand. The Draugr convulsed, its body shaking violently, and then it went still. The glow in its eyes faded, and the oppressive weight of its magic lifted from the air. I stood, panting, my body battered and bloodied, but victorious. I held the Draugr's heart in my hand, feeling the last remnants of its power pulse through my fingers, and I grinned. I would bring this to my sire. And he would know that I was not to be underestimated.